People are not going to like what I'm about to say in this video, but I'm going to ask you to please have an open mind and at least hear me out. The idea of medical gameplay, or what people consider to be medical gameplay in Star Citizen, is only going to get in the way of good gameplay mechanics. Mechanics that are going to make Star Citizen a better MMO game. The type of medical gameplay that these people on Spectrum, and really in a lot of places in Star Citizen want, can only exist in the absence of better, more convenient, and honestly common sense gameplay mechanics for the rest of the player base. In order for medical gameplay, as again, they see it, to survive and thrive in Star Citizen, the majority of players must suffer poor mechanics so that the minority of players can have fun. For example, people will complain that medical gameplay makes no sense because of Tier 0 and not losing your gear. So in that case, we would have to get rid of gear recovery and everything else so that players feel indebted or required to wait for 15 or 20 and sometimes more minutes for somebody to come by and rescue them via a beacon, assuming that they just don't kill them on a spot. Another complaint is that anybody can get a medical ship, and they will often bring their own medical ship to help facilitate doing bunker missions or any type of ground gameplay. I would say, so what? Doesn't that just make sense? It's how people are going to play games. They're going to do the most effective and efficient thing possible, and bring a ship which can sustain you in the field where you are most likely to take damage, which is from FPS infantry combat. Players are going to, of course, bring those medical ships. That's a smart thing to do. So, in essence, in order for medical gameplay to work, again, players have to do the least efficient thing, which they're not going to do, and they have to sacrifice all good gameplay mechanics, such as respawning and item recovery, or insurance, whatever you want to call it. They have to sacrifice those good gameplay mechanics in order to facilitate the medical gameplay. That simply does not make sense, and that does not make for a good game. The reality is that medical gameplay, much like a lot of things that were advertised in Star Citizen, such as exploration and hacking and everything else, is a flawed concept. And these are ancient ideas that were pitched over a decade ago when Chris Roberts was trying to fleece as many gullible people as possible for funding. It is also worth mentioning that a lot of these things were pitched and designed for a game that did not feature FPS infantry combat. The moment that Star Citizen shifted to an MMOFPS, which is what it is now, with a focus on, at least in theory, combined arms infantry combat, and that's a phrase directly from the developers, combined arms. Since they've shifted towards that, the expectations and the design decisions associated with this game also need to shift to facilitate that. So you can either do it the right way or the wrong way. If Star Citizen remained as a space game with only spaceships, a lot of these conversations would not be happening, and this would be a lot easier to address. The moment they add infantry to the game and they try to make a combined arms game, it becomes more complicated. The other thing I want to bring up is this. You will never ever be able to revive a player that is killed by another player under the current rule set. There's this idea that players are going to be rescued. Well, from what? Are they only going to be rescued when they die in PvE? Okay, well, what does that mean, really? The only PvE that a player can die from is a ground mission, is an NPC on the ground shooting them and not finishing them off. Because if they die doing space PvE, their ship is going to explode. If their ship explodes, they die. Or they're going to have an accident and hit an asteroid. Again, ship explodes, they die. They cannot be recovered. If they die in PvP, whether they're on the ground or in space, they're going to be shot until they are killed. So they are going to be unrecoverable. So you have to make a decision now. Do we want realism or do we want good gameplay? I'm always going to go on the side of good gameplay. I am in the camp of the extreme. If medical gameplay or rescuing is to work, then player death has to be near voluntary, meaning it does not matter whether you are shot on the ground and somebody machine guns your body. You are always recoverable if you are willing to wait and you want to be recoverable. I am also of the opinion that if you are in a ship and your ship explodes, your body is also recoverable if you want to be recoverable. That is the only way you're going to get more medical gameplay, because like I said, otherwise the only people that you have to revive are people who die on the ground doing bunker missions. That is a small part of the game. So every other part of the game, you will never ever get to revive people. Now, people are going to go ahead and say, oh, well, but what if we're doing PvP and we kill a bunch of guys and they don't want to release their bodies? Well, obviously, you're going to make the timer a lot shorter. That way, they can't just stay on the ground and, wait and then all pop back up or some other crazy thing that may or may not actually happen. But that's even hard to do with the scale and size and how long it takes to do the most basic things in Star Citizen. And I know somebody's going to say, oh, well, you could just use the grav gun to grief their bodies and kidnap them and throw them in pits, whatever people think about. These are just examples. You could do a lot of things to solve almost anything that players are going to do if you're willing to fix them with common sense game mechanics and not become a slave to realism. This is not the point of the video. These are just examples of the medical system and why it sucks for players and how it doesn't really apply to players under the current rule sets. Because right now, the only people that need medical beacons are people that are in bunkers, and that's about it. The solution here is simple, and what makes me laugh is it's always the stupidity of the Star Citizen community. It's quite possibly one of the most disgusting, vile, mentally ill groups of players I've ever seen in a game. But they will always tout around this idea, this old sales pitch that, it's 10 to 1 NPCs and players, so for every one player, there's 10 NPCs. Yet, they expect players to be revived by other players? How does that even make sense? It doesn't make sense in the economy of scale for the game, not even a little bit. So, the way I would do this is I would simply add medical missions that are totally separate from the way PvP is handled. If you want to revive people, a beacon pops up that an NPC creates. This NPC will need different levels of triage. He'll need to be stabilized, carried back to the ship, and then dropped off at a station for, a fee. This allows you to take your time and experience that medical gameplay without forcing a player to sit there and wait, doing nothing. I'm not going to wait. I do not care what valuable items I have on me. I'm not going to sit there and wait for 30 minutes just so some other guy can relive his fantasy of Chicago Hope in space. It's not happening. But if you put this burden of time on a non-sentient creature, an NPC, I guess you could argue maybe that a lot of SC players are also NPCs. But anyway, if you put it on an NPC, it does not matter anymore. And it allows the player who wants to do the medical gameplay to have a more robust system. Because like I said, you're going to be able to do the stabilization, the triage, the transport, and all that stuff. Because in PvP or with another player, what medical doctor are you? You're basically just an Uber driver. You're picking people up and you're dropping them off. It's kind of silly, isn't it? Hell, honestly, now that I think about it, I can probably release and fly back to my corpse and get my stuff back faster than me waiting for some stranger to maybe show up, especially if I set my regeneration point close to where I'm operating. Just like if I'm on Hurston, I'm set to Hura 1 or Everest Harbor. That's pretty quick return. So yeah, the gameplay, the rescue beacon stuff, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. Quit trying to force it. Would you apply the same level of ridiculousness to bounty hunting in a game? Would you expect me to go out and find a player, and instead of just blowing his ship up and having him wake up in prison, I have to disable his ship and knock him unconscious and throw his body into a holding cell and bring him out there? That's fine for an NPC. All right, bring him back, dead or alive, bring the body back. That might add more fun to the bounty hunting. Players aren't going to tolerate that. Players aren't going to do that. What player is going to sit around while you drag his lifeless or incapacitated body back to Klesher? It's preposterous. It makes no sense. You can't expect a player to do that, but you can expect an NPC to do that because it's an NPC. They don't care. How about transport? Let's expand this idea to other aspects of the game. There's this notion that we're going to be able to have the Genesis Starliner. We're going to be able to fly players around the world and transport them. Really? How's that going to work? Everybody has a ship. Everybody has a starter ship in Star Citizen. How inconvenient are you going to have to make the core gameplay in order to maybe let those 10 or 15 people who want to fly a 747 in space to fulfill that fantasy? It doesn't make sense. So of course you're going to be transporting NPCs. You're going to be picking up and delivering NPCs. It's the only thing that makes sense. Medical gameplay in Star Citizen for PvP or with other players is simply going to have to be relegated to respawning, healing, reviving, and some basic stuff like that. But the rescue beacon stuff, it's not going to work. Get that through your heads. Speaking of respawning, how about getting a really big medical ship and you set it up as a respawn point that people on the planet might have the option of just using? They consume your gel, you get paid for it, and they respawn on your ship. Well, then the question is, well, how the hell do they get off your ship? And then the next question is, okay, well, what if you set this up as a trap and people start spawning on your ship? You got some guy gunning them down in the bed. What, is the reputation system going to fix that? How many other broken systems need to be added to address the other core broken systems in this game and the bad concepts? Think about these things. Think about what can go wrong with all these systems. The more you think about it, the more ridiculous the notion of players and other players interacting in a complex medical system becomes. It's no longer fun for both parties. Unless you're a stupid-ass Redditor, in which case, you'll eat slop and ask for seconds. Either way, short video, short rant. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.